I can only talk about taste from my own perspective, and that's as a chef. I'm not a scientist. I know it's important that we understand, how we taste things and why things taste differently. It's equally important, in my working environment, not to get lost in theory. Something either tastes good or it doesn't. And every chef has their own perspective. As much as I'm not a scientist, I'm not a spokesman for the industry. Everyone has their own cooking style. My day-to-day work consists of creating the dishes that we serve on the menu and then making sure that they're executed consistently every time. There's big waiting lists, and with that comes a lot of pressure. We can't afford to have a single bad service. People don't give restaurants 2 chances. You go once. If you have a bad experience, you just cross it off and don't go back. So there's a sort of relentless pressure that we're under. What I was going to talk about tonight is the thought process behind, creating these dishes, and also the journey from the initial idea to the finished dish, and also the journey from a simple business plan, to a thriving restaurant. So when creating a dish, first thing you think of, as Florence said, what's in season, what's at its best right now, what do I want to eat, what the customer, what do they want to eat right now? You then think, why do we like that ingredient? Every ingredient has something about it that makes it special. If it's a ripe peach, everyone likes a peach, but why? It's the carnality, it's the succulence of it, the density of flesh. With red meat, it's the charred crust when it's cooked over charcoal, and the soft meat within. With shellfish, it's that sort of briny ozone taste. It's my job to showcase these flavors, these qualities, in the simplest, most honest, most concise manner. So with that, modern technique should only be used, to improve consistency and execution. Presentation should be elegant, but it shouldn't be gimmicky. It shouldn't detract from the dish. Finally, the chef's ego can't get in the way. As much as sort of youth and restraint don't always go hand in hand, everything's got to be subservient to taste. If you've got a pretty-looking dish that doesn't taste of much, it'll be instantly forgotten because it hasn't fulfilled its purpose. It hasn't satisfied. It's taste that you remember. Whether it's, your mum's sort of roast chicken or fish and chips or sausage and mash down the pub, chances are they look like shit, especially if it's my mum cooking them. But it's the taste that you remember. That always stays with you. The point of cooking, quite simply, without any sort of state the obvious, is to make food taste better, to make it taste as good as it possibly can, and to do that in the most organic way. Sometimes this takes a lot of work, sometimes very little. Either way, when you eat the dish, it should appear effortless. Just the fig's a prime example right now. Nothing's been done to it. It's also it should be clear what the chef is trying to do. Even when it's exotic or out of context, when you eat a dish, a good dish, it'll always sort of make immediate sense to you. A typical example of this at Dabbous, we serve a dish that we call iced lovage. Now, lovage is a herb. It tastes in between sort of celery and parsley. And we serve this as a bridge after the main course and before the dessert. We make a deliberately unbalanced sorbet recipe. It's not smooth, which is what you normally want. It's crystalline and it's icy. And we just serve a rough scoop of this in a bowl. It looks how it tastes and it tastes how it feels. It's verdant green, crisp, ice cold and grassy. And when you eat it, the flavour you immediately get is one of the smell of a freshly mowed lawn. So even though you might not know what lovage is, when you eat it, it's clear what I'm trying to achieve in that dish. These dishes, they can maybe be a little bit chefy, little bit esoteric. So it's really important over the course of dinner, if you have a tasting menu or whatever, to interject the menu with dishes that just are immediately gratifying, dishes that don't require concentration or explanation. So, usually the third course on our tasting menu, we do a coddled egg with smoked butter, or mash and gravy, or something that you eat with your hands. It should be simple, direct, and deeply satisfying. And these dishes, they give context to the lighter ones, and they also give a sense of honesty and accessibility, which is key when you have dinner. It's got to satisfy. Making the dish from start to finish for the first time is creatively the most interesting. I haven't bought a recipe book apart from Florence and Miss Marmite lovers in a long time. And you sort of over time you know the basics of the ratios and shared properties. Vinaigrettes 4 parts oil, 1 part vinegar. Medium rare is 55 degrees. Well done 70-degree core temperature. Custards cook at 80. All these things. You've got this sort of basic knowledge, so you don't start off on a pre-existing recipe. Always start on a blank page. You have the overall idea for the dish based on what's in season, as I said before, and then you break it down into its constituent parts, and then you set about nailing each one of those parts. Luckily for me, the food I cook is really simple, so at most there'll be 4 elements on the dish. At the same time, that gives you such little room for error. The simpler the food, the more faultless it's got to be. Once I'm happy with all the parts, I'll assemble the dish and I'll eat it in the restaurant, away from the noise of the kitchen. Obviously, when there aren't customers there, just so I sort of analyse the dish. Obviously you're thinking seasoning content right, temperature right, sort of fat content, acidity, texture, all these things. But essentially, you just have an immediate feeling of rightness, and the more you cook, the more you'll just have that sort of innate judgment of, it needs this or that or whatever it is. In general, I get to about sort of 10% of the finished dish, to within 10% of the finished dish on the first go. But the last 10% can be really agonising. You keep refining, till eventually you sort of, get to where you want to be. Then once I'm happy, I give it to all my other chefs to try in the kitchen. It's important, to hear their thoughts, their feedback. At the same time, it's my name on the door. If I'm happy with something, then I'll sort of make that call, even if, people might disagree. I then print a recipe sheet, and I cook that dish from start to finish, with a chef that's going to be executing it on a daily basis for me. Kitchens, they're divided into, you've got meat section, fish section, garnish, cold starter, hot starter, desserts. Other bigger kitchens, you'll have a garnish section. I'll cook the dish with the guy that's going to be doing it. It's key that he understands the thought process behind the dish and the importance of each process. It's layers of attention to detail that make an average dish good or a good dish great. That chef, he needs to feel ownership of the dish and pride in what he's serving. I need him invested. He's cooking my food and either protecting or damaging my reputation every night. That's all he's got to care about for 16 hours of the day. And that's key. We then serve the dish to all our front of house staff, and that's quite fascinating because sometimes you'll get a dish that you think might be a bit esoteric or polarizing, and actually it'll have mass appeal, and vice versa. Their virginal reaction is always an interesting one to me, for me to sort of observe, because obviously I've been sort of entrenched or absorbed in my sort of little world creating this dish, and they're having it for the first time. So I always sort of watch them kind of like a wildlife program or something, sort of examining their behavior as they eat it. So. So with this, so it gives them knowledge to explain the dish. It enables the sommelier to sort of be able to suggest a wine pairing. Also, it sort of reinvigorates a sort of sense of pride. What they're serving isn't rubbish. So you want them, when they put down the food, to really feel pride in what they're serving. I think chefs also have a responsibility to the farmer and the fisherman to respect the product of their labour. There's a whole story behind an ingredient before it arrives in your kitchen or mine, and that's largely forgotten because it's so easy for me to phone up my veg supplier, place an order, or for you to go shopping. But there's labour and toil involved. They're not glamorous professions. They're hard professions. I think mine's bad. Fucking, I wouldn't want to be a fisherman. They're at sea for days in the cold and wet. Equally, a farmer, it's backbreaking work. You've got to get up, at the crack of dawn, plough the field, sow the seed, care for it, water it, albeit with, sort of machines these days to make it easier, but it's still a hard job. And I always think it's a good test of a dish, asking yourself, would the farmer, would the fisherman, would they enjoy it? Would they think you've produced something of merit, something that validates their hard work? I think it helps keep your menu honest. That was a word that Florence used, and I think that's one that is, does resonate. A lot of people talk about chefy food or whatever, but what we do is really, really simple. I think honesty is key. Equally, the desire to respect ingredients can sort of drift into this sort of sanctimonious nature. It's a real pet hate of mine. I think 10 years ago, futuristic, technique-driven cooking was the pioneering movement. Chefs were looking at technology to see sort of how they could sort of do the latest of creations and evolve. And the gap between laboratory equipment and kitchen equipment, that faded. And that's not a bad thing in itself. Discoveries are made that then become ingrained in more traditional kitchens. And these discoveries, they improve consistency, they improve working hours, they improve food costs. So it's not a bad thing in itself, but along with it, you do get this sort of wave of pretentious cooking, cooked by pretentious chefs, who feel the ingredients just a sort of tool for them to show off with. The counter movement to that has been obviously very, very localized cooking with everything's foraged, obviously, and there's a lot of old-fashioned technique and some romanticism. And again, that's a nice thing in itself. But, it's become very sort of self-engrossed, and in doing so, it's become as sort of pretentious as the sort of cooking style that it was a movement against in the first place. The chefs, they in their sort of quest for sort of this, sort of relentless austerity, they're not thinking, does this taste good? Is the customer going to enjoy it? There's more restaurants than ever before now, so there's more chefs than ever before, and more media coverage than ever before. And as a result, you get a lot of chefs that feel the need to intellectualize their role, to sort of add layers of sort of concept and manifesto to what they do, to grab a little bit of limelight or whatever. And it's sort of a little bit ridiculous. I think they cook people dinner, I cook people dinner. That's it, And if you do a good job, if people like it, then that's enough in itself. That's the job we sign up for, not sort of politicians or whatever. There's different branches of sort of cooking, and we've got quite a few here today. But I think chefs that run restaurants, it's sort of key that they don't sort of drift into sort of entertainment for the sake of it, or sort of making a statement. You're serving people dinner, and I think it's key to remember that. Two years ago, I was working in in a West End nightclub, one of these sort of posh places where rich kids go. And I was cooking burgers there. I'd spent 10 years working in the best restaurants in Europe, but I sort of found myself a little bit unemployable as, you know, in a head chef role. People saw my CV and thought I was going to do something very maverick or very, you know, very left field, when, you know, it wasn't my style at all. You know, the only places really hiring head chefs was steakhouses or restaurant groups, neither of which appealed. It was massively frustrating, so I, you know, dedicated my youth to learning my craft, and then you suddenly hit, you know, you think you should be as employable as you can be, and you hit a dead end. And I was there for about 2 years. It was massively frustrating, massively depressing as well. So I'd always envisaged setting up my own restaurant, but the sort of the lack of finding a suitable employer that wanted sort of me for me just accelerated that process. So I set about writing a business plan and came up with what I thought was a polished version of that. I sent it out to anyone and everyone that I thought had a bit of cash or might be interested in investing. I sent it to Innocent as well. I thought they might empathise. But I think, unfortunately, it didn't get past Richard's PA, who I think probably receives hundreds of the sort of Willy Wonka type get-rich-quick business plans. But and in general, didn't have that much luck. I was too humble, and it didn't work. You know, I was just sort of grateful for an audience, and you know, there were a few people interested though, and they did end up becoming my backers. You know, they read the plan, and I think, you know, the sense of identity resonated with them, and they also sort of appreciated that the team that I had lined up, you know, it all, you know, worked as managers or head chefs for other people and just wanted to do it for ourselves. At the same time, this was all just hypothetical. It was words on paper. There was no site, no money, and there wasn't going to be one without the other. So you lie. You know, you don't say where the project is because you'll lack immediate credibility. You say where you want the project to be, and eventually reality will catch up. You just sort of got to drag it there yourself. From an initial budget of 1.2 million, I soon realised I had to lower my expectation level, and you know, it went for about 400 grand. That was the cheapest I could set up a restaurant for. Spent a lot of time online looking at, you know, commercial real estate, restaurants and bars for sale, then crossing off, you know, all of them pretty much because they're out of our price range. Did eventually stumble across the site on Whitfield Street where we are today. I took a look and it immediately felt right. I went back with my brother and Oscar, my business partner who runs the bar, and the architects, and everyone saw the potential in the space. That's obviously very reassuring. You're not just sort of by yourself saying this is great, stood in a concrete shell that's sort of falling about around you. So I put an offer on. Again, at this point, we had no money in the bank, didn't even have a bank account. I put an offer on to the landlords and started agreeing heads of terms. The people that did show a little bit of interest at the start, you know, I got back in touch with them. I told them I'd secured the site and most of the capital. I just needed their capital, a little bit more, to complete the funding. You know, it was key. It worked. But no, it was key. You know, at the start, like I said before, I was too humble and it got me nowhere. You know, I had to instill a sense of momentum, inevitability, and excitement. You know, this was going to happen. It was going to be amazing. And if they didn't invest, they'd miss out. You know, I didn't necessarily believe this because I was blagging everyone at this point, but they had to. You know, so I had 3 weeks to prove my assets, which were officially FA at that point still. Sorry. Luckily, the landlord and the estate agent, they were both on holiday, so that bought me the 3 weeks. Otherwise, Otherwise, I'd have had to get creative with my lying. But end of week one, like I said, a lot came good. End of week one, we had 100 grand in the bank account that I'd frantically opened with Lloyd's in the interim period. Week two, about 200 grand. Then at the end of week three, just under $500,000. So as proud as I am of the success we've gone on to achieve as a young business, as a small company, I'm probably proudest of raising the funding. That's not my natural territory. No one had heard of me. The site was a concrete shell. Some people probably say it still is. And we're in the middle of a recession. 500 grand doesn't get you much in W1. It's as we soon found out, our budget was perhaps unrealistically tight. But chances are when you do open, things aren't going to be perfect. You will have to compromise. An economy forces you to be creative. Well, it actually makes decision-making easier, just 'cause it eliminates choice, because you can't do this, so you have to do that. What's clear from what I went through is the importance of resilience and not being afraid to fail. I'd have gladly lost all my money if things had gone wrong. It was a decision that I came to quite early. It was, my fear wasn't bankruptcy or bad reviews. My fear was working like a dog for the last 10 years, with no money, no social life, and not at the end of that creating, an opportunity for me to sort of fulfill my potential, to do what I've sort of trained to do. That scared me to death. So at the restaurant, before we opened, we never considered where we'd sort of sit in the restaurant landscape. I think if we just set about creating the type of restaurant that we'd like to go to, if you look at what your competitors are doing, you'll only ever be, a little bit better. I think start with a blank page. Either be spectacular or go down swinging. But I think the worst thing you could ever do is be average. And similarly, one thing I'd say is, if you look to give customers what you think they want, you'll only do exactly that. You'll never exceed expectations. Give them what you want them to have, and hopefully that will be better than they ever imagined. Then do it at a price they won't resent, and do it with a smile on your face. Even if not everyone likes what you do, it won't matter, because it'll already be successful. Thank you. That's it.